Okay. All right. So hopefully this is all fine. Okay. Now they can see if somebody is on, or if not, it's being recorded. Excellent. Okay. So we've been studying the growth of the reform movement, and it starts in Germany in the 19th, early 19th century. And then we saw how first it was just, a reaction to what was going on in Germany at the time, the fact that emancipation or the hope for a total emancipation, had now started, especially after Napoleon had initially invaded, and then everything had reverted back, to reactionary movements. So the Jews very much had had a taste of this freedom and acceptance in the general community. They did not want to go back to medieval, practices. And but the way they interpreted it, first of all, many, I had told you, converted. They literally left Judaism, converted to Christianity. They figured this way they'd get their in with general society and be accepted. Uh, but some viewed it as, no, we don't have to convert, but we need to change, our practices of Judaism. And they became pretty radical, some of the changes that they introduced. And Eventually it became so to speak, there was philosophical underpinnings to this leaving of traditional Judaism and adopting reform practices. And so certain great, leaders came out from there. And one that we had already discussed them, we could just slightly review that. So it's the page that says, okay, I discussed certain major people. So it's the one that says the reform movement, 19th century Germany continued, right, in which I was in the middle of doing that. And the chief proponent, again, of this, a writing, giving underpinnings, an explanation, legitimacy to the reform movement. And his name was Abraham Geiger. And he is considered the founder of the reform movement, even though obviously the leanings towards reform and making changes already in certain congregations, that was founded even before, he started doing his writings about it. And he's extremely well known, in those circles. What we're going to do today is so I have handed out to you. I handed out one sheet that says the Torah Masters. I'll get back to that first. I want to address first what's the Orthodox response to this reform movement. Now, it's so interesting. I mean, I'm sure all of you have heard of Samson Raphael Hirsch, and he is considered, the major spokesperson for Orthodoxy in Germany. But there's another individual. It's funny. I only found him in one source, and that's Rabbi Wein's book. He wrote like a trilogy, 3-volume work on Jewish history, and his name was a Rabbi Bamberger. And I noticed this past year, I didn't take advantage of it. I think the lectures were being given in the evening, but there's an organization out of Toronto called Torah in Motion, and they actually have some superb lecturers there. If you ever want to, you could just sign up and you can pick and choose who you want to listen to. So I'm sorry I didn't take advantage of it, but I don't remember which individual was, but gave a series of lectures on this Rabbi Bamberger, who I really was not familiar with. And I'm trying to understand, so why did Rabbi Wein devote he has like 3 pages on Rabbi Bamberger. Because his approach was slightly different than that of Samson Raphael Hirsch. They were both rabbis in Germany and both in Frankfurt am Main. It's interesting. And I think because Rabbi Wein, as a practicing Rav of the Shuls, I think he was confronted with some of the issues, that these two rabbis. So they have different attitudes, this Rabbi Bamberger, Samson Raphael Hirsch, to how to respond to the reform movement. Both of them are Orthodox. So let's look into that. I found that really interesting, to discover that. All right. So again, I am on the one that says the Orthodox response to reform. Actually, we're going to do that one first. Then we can do some of those other Rabbanim, from this time period. Okay. So follow with me. Okay, and we will. I'll explain further again why I think Rabbi Wan was felt that the introduction really, because I must have looked at least 4 other sources, and Rabbi Bamberger's name is not mentioned. They all talk about Samson Raphael Hirsch, and we certainly, those of you from the New York area, Washington Heights, the Breuers, that's a continuation of Hirsch. Okay. Orthodox Jewry responded in varied form to both emancipation and reform. Now, you have to understand, these are both German rabbis that we're talking about. And then we're going to then also talk about a very famous Rav from Austria-Hungary. And of course, the response in Eastern Europe is going to be very different. I mean, that was a real entrenchment of Orthodoxy. It was initially overwhelmed by the rapid advance of reform. I mean, it really took off like wildfire. Here were these were more modern Jews, probably initially from the wealthier class, who wanted so much to be accepted by the regular German population as equals. Of course, as we know, just look at the Holocaust. It really never were, but in their minds, they were very proud Germans. In fact, they call themselves Germans of the Mosaic persuasion. That's how they describe it. They didn't call themselves Jews. They were Germans of the Mosaic, right? So I know, how do we view ourselves here in America? We are American Jews. Are we Americans of the Jewish persuasion? It's kind of interesting. I don't know about you. I mean, I definitely identify myself first and foremost as a Jew. Doesn't matter where I live, I am a Jew, and nobody else will let me forget that either. But I also, well, not so much nowadays, but I had been a very proud American, growing up here, the ideals of, freedom and democracy and, so, it's sort of ambivalent as to how you want to identify yourself, but obviously, if you are an observant Jew, that's your first identity is being Jewish. Okay, most Western Europeans. When I say Western, we're talking about Germany. I mean, it could include France too, but France didn't have this whole big gadula about reform. Not to say that there are not now today congregations in France. I'm really not familiar. I have to ask Shalom if he knows this. And there are in England today. There is a reform movement, and then there's, but essentially the official thing are the Orthodox Jews. So the chief rabbi of England is always an Orthodox Jew, and he's recognized by the British government as such. Which is interesting. But unfortunately, a very, very large majority, of these Western European Jews, they were willing to leave their traditional Jewish life. And they had practiced this for generations in the ghetto, but I guess they associated it with being behind walls. Now that the walls are broken down, let's leave those foreign, backward ways behind us and surge forward. By 1850, reform became the dominant Kehillah life of many communities throughout Western and Central Europe. But it was at that time that the Orthodox mounted a strong counterattack. All right. So this first individual, again, thanks to Rabbi Wine's book, and I told you that one series of lectures, but I now want to backtrack. When you sign up for one of these organizations, you can always go into their archives and see former lectures. So his name was, or is, Rabbi Isaac, also Seligman Bear, Bamberger. Okay, and his dates are 1807 to 1878. They're almost exact. You'll see very similar dates to Samson Raphael Hirsch. So they lived totally in that 19th century. He started off. He was a Rav in Würzburg, which is Bavaria, and Bavaria is southeastern Germany, okay, pretty close to Austria. And that was his first major position. I didn't have a chance to look in the Encyclopedia Judaica because they give you some more additional information. So, I'm not sure of his early origin. Hashem, I can do that, for next week. He strengthened orthodoxy by forming a large synagogue congregation, opening and maintaining a yeshiva, as well as rabbinical training program. So similar, we'll do with, we already touched upon Samson Reform, but he's known for his educational system and all day schools in America. We patterned ourselves, on what he had done, going back 150 years ago. In 1855, he established a complete Jewish educational system from elementary school to higher education. This didn't really exist before. You would go, if you were a boy in particular, these were probably mostly for young men, boys. I'm not sure if the girls went in Germany. That's a later date, and that's thanks to actually the Beis Yaakov movement in Eastern Europe. But so here, I said traditionally would have been learned with a Rebbe, with a Tater, but now he's going to combine, because of this surge towards modernity. So he's going to combine, obviously, the Judaic studies with secular stuff. And Samson Raphael Hirsch does the same thing. But we'll see what the difference between these two men are. Okay. Now, he himself was a Talmudic scholar of note. I mean, he was very good education. He was, respected as somebody who knew his material. And he wrote numerous books on halacha, Talmud, customs, and Hebrew grammar and exegesis. The study of the Hebrew language. He also had a broad secular education, though it was informal and non-university oriented. I noticed several of Rabbonim from this time period they learned on their own. Obviously, they were extremely intelligent, that they could discipline themselves, right, to have German books in German, this was their language, and that's how they educated themselves. But some of them did go to university, as we'll see, Samson Raphael Hirsch. Right? And certainly those reform rabbis, they went to university. Because of his personality. Again, it all boils down to that, actually. What type of influence does one have? It's also your type of personality. Aren't you attracted to certain people, and then that they will influence you? Sometimes I notice like certain Baal Tshuva. So if they come to Judaism because of their attraction to a particular Rav, when that Rav is no longer around, they can backslide. Because everything is connected to this personal connection. Okay? And he had a very moderate behavior. So he was obviously a very appealing individual. He proved to be an elusive target for reform. Okay, so that it was hard to counterattack him because he was this very pleasant, individual. So they had to treat him a little more gently than they might have to maybe more right-wing Orthodox Jews. And he helped to stem the tide of reform in Germany. Now, essentially, again, this is Rabbi Wein that, actually I'm quoting from here, because I say we tend to think of Samson Raphael Hirsch. So we'll see as we go on with his biography, why are we following Rav Hirsch's methodology and not as much Rabbi Bamberger's. Okay. Now, just a general side, we're going to tell you here about how things existed in Germany vis-a-vis the government and religion. German state and city law required all Jews to belong to a single religious community. I think in part in England, it's somewhat similar. I have to check with Shalom. I mean, the Orthodox have their thing, of course, the Spanish Portuguese have their thing, and then the Reform. So, you belong, though, to one of these groupings, right? When Reform came to dominate most of these Kehillah structures, it's interesting, at the beginning, when reform was growing, the government sort of favored the Orthodoxes because they were the traditional ones. But as I say, but by this mid-century, they are now favoring the reform and recognizing reform as being the representatives of the Jewish community, not the. Okay, so when reform came to dominate, Orthodox Jews were forced to remain, this is interesting, tax-paying members of the Reformed community. I mean, if you wanted to be part of the general Jewish community, this is how, you had to pay your dues to the Reform, even though, personally you were Orthodox. Even in cases where the new leaders closed such institutions as the yeshiva and the mikveh. I told you how my Zeta had this big to-do with the Reform rabbi in, I don't know if it was Abba Hillel Silver, my Zeta Rabbi Eliezer Silver. Anyways, big to-do in Cincinnati over the building of a new mikveh. It's funny, nowadays we don't have this terrible conflict. I guess that's good. But I remember growing up and like the reform were like almost like an anathema, because they always opposed everything that the Orthodox tried to do to keep, and I told you how my father, when he could be that's the reason. I don't know. I mean, HUC does have a small place in Yerushalayim, and the Masorati, the conservative movement, you're trying to make inroads in Israel. So, the dominant, of course, is the Orthodox, But going back to my father, I mentioned last time how hard it was till, the reform opposed when he started, wanted to found the day schools. This is in 1943 in Harrisburg. And the reform put up a whole hue and cry. And then my father, because obviously, he had approached the JCC, to permission to rent some classrooms. And they would have had Hebrew school later in the day, but obviously during the day these rooms weren't being used. So he wanted to rent them for the establishment of the day school, of the Jewish day school, and the reform. They were really opposed to it. Part of the reason I mentioned last time is because they were so in favor of public education. And they felt that, again, for Jews to be accepted, you had to go to the same educational system as every other individual, in a particular town. And really, public education was a great modifier, at a certain point, because everybody, would have gone to the public school. Obviously, eventually there were enough people. I think eventually my father got some back into conservative. The conservatives were more in the majority than the reform. But okay. Many Orthodox leaders. So okay. So can you imagine you're Orthodox, but you have to pay into the main kahila, which at that point the dominant one was reform. So many Orthodox leaders fought for the right to secede and form their own communities. Why should we, be part? Why do we have to pay dues to, we don't agree with their philosophies? Gradually, the German legislature granted these rights. But look how long it took. In 1876, look how long they were arguing their case. It became the law in Frankfurt am Main as well. And remember, this is just at the time when Germany is going to be unified, but up until now, remember, it's still divided up into all these different principalities and groupings, all right? Once German law permitted the Jews to secede from the Reform religious community and form their own separate Orthodox communities, such independent communities were established in several cities. Okay, now we're going to talk more about Rabbi Ben. What was his position vis-a-vis, being part of a larger Reform kahila or having a separate Orthodox kahila? He was a pragmatist. Where it was possible for the Orthodox to maintain, thank you, their autonomy within the general community, he opposed secession. He wanted to, he wanted to be part and parcel of the general Jewish community. They were Reform or Orthodox. So again, if it was a town which gave permission to the Orthodox to also have their own community, then he was, okay with that fact. But in those communities where reform had prevailed and would not accommodate Torah Judaism, Bamberger advised the formation of a separate Orthodox community. So where he saw he could not get along with the reform, all right? And they were so oppositional, right, to Torah Judaism. So at that point, he said, okay, well, we do need to see, ideally, you like the idea of being part of the general, as I say, Jewish community, but if conditions prevail that was made it impossible, so then he said, fine. So it's okay to secede. He firmly believed that by positive deeds, building synagogues, yeshivot, and schools, again, Rabbi Hirsch's thing, reform would, now this is interesting. I don't think Rabbi Sensimer for Hirsch this. Reform would itself be influenced, and the traditional forms of Judaism would eventually prevail. I mean, the reform movement was so entrenched. I mean, here in America, that then becomes the conservative movement is the dominant, thing. They don't want to be Orthodox. They're very content, with the way, they're conducting things. Once the reform community of Frankfurt am Main offered to moderate its hostility and accommodate the needs of the Orthodox, Rabbi Bamberger came out publicly against secession. Okay, so this is where he's going to differ with Samson Raphael Hirsch. That again, in Rabbi Bamberger's viewpoint, again, we need to work together. It's not right that we should have our own separate kihila. He's not talking about the shul itself or even the schools he established. I mean, they were definitely Orthodox, but as an overall pattern, we need to be unified. And again, this is an opposition to Samson Raphael Hirsch, who I'm going to give you some more information for Samson Raphael Hirsch, even though we had touched upon some of his background last time, but now I'm going to give you a little bit more. But in other words, so there are now going to be two Orthodox communities in Frankfurt am Main. The larger one, certainly initially, is Rabbi Bamberger's, all right? That was the first to be established. And Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, when he moved to Frankfurt am Main, he's going to establish a second, more rigid Orthodox community. Rabbi Bamberger's stand caused Frankfurt Orthodoxy to split. I mean, this nebuch, that's should be one against another. Bamberger's pragmatic view was eventually adopted by many of the Orthodox Jews in Germany who viewed him as a champion of Orthodoxy. Again, he has the larger congregation. He was there first. Rabbi Samson Hirsch only moved to Frankfurt am Main at a later date. Okay, so now I just want to try to analyze. So why is Rabbi Wan so interested in this Rav? I'm telling you, all the other sources, they don't even mention his name. Okay, they all talk about Samson Raphael Hirsch as being the champion of Orthodoxy, but they don't mention. I think because as a Rav, let's say even here in the US, it is a debate among Orthodox Rabbanim. For example, should you be part of the board of rabbis of a particular community? Or should we have nothing to do with the reform and conservative, and just have our own organization? I guess it depends on the circumstance, and what's going on. I noticed, I would say my father's my prime example, as a rabbi, in a community with all these divisions. Obviously, when it was an issue of the general Jewish community, he would have participated in. I don't know that it was called a board of rabbis. I can't remember anymore. But he would have had dealings, with. But certainly on a religious level, he would never have anything, and he would never step foot into their shul. I actually just recently met a woman. She told me she grew up in the conservative temple, the Bethel. But I guess I don't know what her journey was, but she somehow became an Orthodox person. But her parents were still members of the church, the temple. So when she got married, they went to the wedding to be there. So sort of as a compromise, her wedding was actually held outside, and but she had my father come to officiate, so that it was, an Orthodox ceremony, but he wouldn't go into the temple, to perform this ceremony. Um, so I don't know what it's like now for a lot of Orthodox rabbis. I mean, I here in America, I mean, I think a lot of them. I'm not talking maybe so much of, yeah. I mean, even in New York City, depending on the rabbi. I mean, I grew up in a small town. I grew up in real America. So, it is important that we stick together, as a Jewish community. But certainly when it comes to religious matters, we have to be separate. So I think again, Rabbi Wein was he initially in Miami, right? Was he right? Oh, right, and very well respected there. So I'm sure he dealt with a lot of these issues, and maybe that's why he was so drawn to Rabbi Bamberger, because Rabbi Bamberger did feel, one should not secede from the general Jewish community, but you all have to work together. I found myself growing up, I felt like the JCC was a great moderating force because everybody would go there for programming. Um, Obviously I met other kids, but my friends were all the ones from the day school, the Orthodox kids, obviously, because especially when you get together, it's mostly like Shabbos or something, and obviously the others observe it. So my friends are obviously the Orthodox kids. Uh, but the JCC was the place to go. I mean, everybody would go there for programs. Uh, I suppose you're right. Yes. Yeah, exactly. For anything of a communal. Oh, he does. But see, like my father would never have done that. He would. Ah, interesting. Yeah. Oh, they don't even go to the JC. Well, I have to tell you, I like there's a JCC here, and they have a senior center. It's called the Sandler Center, and I actually have some very good programming. And I haven't taken advantage of it this year so much, but I have gone in the past. I am the Orthodox Jew there. Really, and I can see from the comments, you know, uh, there's still a lot of venom in those old fashioned. I don't know if they're conservative reform. Some of these ladies, whoa, they do not like the Orthodox, So yeah, and so it's a little ugly. I didn't bother ever to say anything or whatever. I mean, they're not going to change these people. I do think though the younger generation, you know, there's not this ugly opposition. Anyways, so I just wanted to explain why I think Rabbi Y was so intrigued by Rabbi Thayer. I devoted, I don't remember, it was 2 or 3 pages in his Jewish history book, to him because he himself probably had to deal with this. How far should he participate or withdraw? Now, yeah, sure. Oh my. Uh, oh wow. Oh wow. Oh my. Oh, he has. Oh, I have to look for that. Oh, how fascinating. I knew in Harrisburg somebody had Rochester. Somebody had moved in at one point when I was living there, also with the last name Bamberger. So I'm sure he was also related, right, to him. Uh, so even though nobody else seems to mention this wrong, I mean, he obviously did have an impact. And as I say, and certainly initially, he had the larger Orthodox congregation. Rabbi Hirsch, it was the newcomer. So we'll see. But now I'll discuss a little bit more about Rabbi Becker. So you'll see his dates very similar. Born 1808, passed away in 1888. Now this is interesting. He becomes what's known, I guess, depending on what book you're reading, what they came to call neo-orthodoxy. I don't know. Is this what we call today modern orthodoxy? I mean, I'm not really probably okay. And his like saying the way to describe was Torah im derech eretz. So he's not going to ignore, the contributions of secular learning, but obviously Torah learning is supreme value. And that's why YU is it's Torah im Mada, the Torah im science. All right, but it's the same concept, learn having a Torah education and also secular. I mean, for me, having gone to Stern College, I mean, it's such a machai, or I guess nowadays Touro College also, to go to one institution where you're getting, both streams of thought. Never those kids who've opted to go to secular colleges, boy, now they're, suffering. You know, I don't know what the reason is. I don't know that some of the days, I know, like, for example, the Katz Yeshiva High School, most of those kids go off to secular college. They do not go to the places. Yeah, yeah, yeah. They don't go to YU or Stern or Touro. So, you know, I can't begin to fathom it. Part of it is also finances. I know certainly, I think Truro is less expensive. YU is extremely expensive. But hey, if my father could afford, obviously you get loans, or you get scholarship, financial need. If you think it's important enough, you do it for your children. I mean, I would never have considered sending my children to a general school. Yeah, I never would, never. It had to be in a Jewish environment. So what? So what? There's no problem. Yeah, now that's fantastic. Yeah, thanks to that one very generous woman. But I mean, my parents, listen, I was sent out of town. I was 13 years old because my only option was I stayed on in Harrisburg. I would have had to go to public school. And there wasn't any proper higher tuition. I can't do the even schooling. So my parents sent me out of town. I never lived at home from the time I was 13. I lived with an aunt and uncle in Teaneck, New Jersey, which was a big conservative Jewish community. And that's where my aunt and uncle went to the conservative temple. I never went to shul. All those years, I lived with them. But then I had to commute from New Jersey to Manhattan. At that point, Manhattan Central opened up. My sisters went to Brooklyn Central. But by the time I was ready to go away for high school, I went to Manhattan Central. That's where I got my education. And then we all went to Stern College, all of us. I mean, then we went on, we got master's degrees at, regular colleges. But, so most of my education was always in a Jewish, institution. It's just more natural. You don't have to worry about your identity. You're in a room, play, people. So what? I had no problem getting a job. I mean, no, not at all. And look how many kids graduate, and go on to medical school or become lawyers, and there's not an issue, but it's just a more secure environment to be in a place. Most of the students was not doing right. Yes, yeah. Well, first of all, now they are really now officially not the YU. This happened several years ago. There was a dispute. But even before if you take government funds, that's the tricky part. That's right. You have to be accepting of all types of people, all types of groups. All right, so let's go on to Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, who I would say is the father of the Orthodoxy. Okay. Yes. On Washington Heights. Did I tell you my story? I remember I was in the Heights for Shabbos. I don't remember where we're staying. But in any case, I went to David and I come in. The place was really empty. So I sat down. Now there are a gazillion and one empty seats, but this one lady comes in and she says, "You are sitting in my seat." Okay. And I davened one time, I mean, numerous times in the Spanish Portuguese shul, same in Israel, New York City. But there was this one woman of German heritage who belonged. Lived on the west side, so that was her shul. So I came in and plenty of empty seats. I sit down. She was like two seats away from me, and she turns to me at one point. I just want to let you know that you are sitting. Hey, baby. Oh, right, right, right. Listen, oh my God. That's it. Listen, I had my name on a seat in the shul in Rochester because it was a fundraiser. But anyway, let's discuss a little bit more about Samson before and how he differed. At the age of 22, he became the rabbi where in 1836 he published his first famous work. We mentioned it last time, called the Nine Letters of Ben Uziel. An explanation of Jewish practice and law, but done in a way that would be appealing to even younger people who would read it. And I remember learning from Shalom. I can't remember, but there was a lady also in 19th century England, an Orthodox Jew, and she also wrote a book geared to younger people, laying out the major principles of traditional Orthodox Judaism. This work had a profound impact on many rootless young German Jews. I mean, it gave them like a proper explanation, for Orthodox beliefs, But again, it was written in a way that would appeal to young people. It provided focus for an intelligent examination of traditional Judaism in the light of the new enlightenment. Not to just view it as this old-fashioned, archaic, thing from a religion of the past, but to make it relevant, to modern times. His Hirsch's later works, Chorev, which is a much more substantial explanation of Jewish law. His commentaries to the Bible, to Chumash, great. I love his explanations. They're really excellent. To Hillel, and also in the Siddur. And countless articles and letters. A very prolific writer. They were all in the same vein, giving very good, cogent explanations of Jewish law and customs, but explaining them on a level that a more modern person, could understand. They're written in flawless literary German. Obviously, beautiful German. So that's why I say to you, when we look back at Mendelssohn, he was so highly criticized, but look, how right. I mean, look at ArtScroll. I mean, look, thanks to ArtScroll has made available, to so many people in the English language, all these many traditional works of Judaism. So it's the same thing there in Germany. Eventually it became acceptable. Yes, speaking the German language, learn the German language, and they were relevant to the time. Hirsch was fiercely protective of traditional Judaism, its values and customs. All right. In 1851, he resigned he had this excellent position in Austria-Hungary. Listen, he was not Austria-Hungary, he was the chief rabbi of Moravia. Again, we still know of, I still think of it as anymore. And he was, look at this, he was at that point, that was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was a member of the Austro-Hungarian Parliament. Oh my God. So he had a highly, highly respected position. And look at this, he resigns from it. Why? To become rabbi of a small Orthodox congregation in Frankfurt am Main. He saw what was going on in Frankfurt am Main, in Germany in general, with the growth of reform. And he felt compelled that he should move there and stand up for Orthodox Judaism. And again, Rabbi Bamberger is already there. but he takes a bit more of a moderate view that yes, we need to be part of the overall, Jewish community. So this is just repeating what we had already learned. German law did not then permit the group to organize an independent Kehillah, but this group, Kahal Adat Yeshurun, right, right, eventually became one of the leading congregations in the world. That's it. And it started off, I think he had like 11 members, I read. It was this little tiny shul. And look how it grew again. He organized elementary and high schools. So again, Rabbi Bamberger was doing a similar thing. But, he's taking a stricter view, do not involve yourselves with the reform. We need to stay separate. Where rigorous religious Talmudic knowledge were successfully combined with secular study. I don't have it here. I think it was on a previous page when we talked about Samson Raphael Hirsch, that he, I believe he studied at a university. I'm not sure. Let's see what I wrote about. Oh yes, he studied at the University of Bonn. So, as opposed to just studying it on his own, he actually look around Soloveitchik, the Babich Rebbe, to university. Yeah. Right. Yes. It was considered a very, very U.S. study. Um, okay. His congregants fully integrated themselves in German and professional life, where they had no problem. I mean, staunchly Orthodox Jews, which is important parts of the German, general community. But they were fiercely loyal, observant Jews who did not discard any custom or law of Judaism. Hirsch attacked reform head on. Rabbi Bernberg was taking a little more cautious approach to dealing with reform, but Rabbi Hirsch just spoke out very vigorously against it. He borrowed all its positive aspects, which are education, meaning secular education, social acceptance and manners and dress, right? So instead of looking like the Hasidim, for example, they're so obviously different, right? Here we're dressing just like we are. We're just dressing like any other American, right? And the veneer of Western culture. And he integrated them into a thoroughly traditional, fully observant Jewish community. He not only refused to compromise with reform, he refused to associate. So again, this is the dilemma for American rabbis. How much, should we interact with the reform? And the conservative is the dominant, or was not anymore, but it was the dominant Jewish, movement in America. In 1876, already discussed this, a new German law finally permitted Jews to secede from the official community. Hirsch took this opportunity to separate himself and his congregation from the larger German Jewish community, which was so heavily dominated by reform. Unlike Rabbi Bamberger, he wanted not so much as to influence reform. I guess it was they didn't want to listen. They wanted to separate themselves, to discard so much of the trappings of traditional Judaism, as to free himself and his community from reform. We're not like them. We don't follow the practices. We want nothing to do with them. We want our own community. He refused to extend any form of communal recognition to Jewish organizations that denied the divinity, right? And the authority of Torah. He articulated the principle that any Judaism that denied the authority of the written and oral law was inherently false, right? Reform. They do not believe in Torah, Shabbat Peh, right? So that's why they're very askance at the Talmud, publication that had come out. And they feel that you can change. That was their view. You can, as time goes on, change it. Therefore, as a matter of principle, Orthodox Jews could not give it the recognition implied by membership. Again, I think things have changed, certainly here in America. I think more, and although I spoke to my son Yechiel, now he lives in Detroit, officially Southfield. There are very few Jews actually in Detroit itself anymore. Okay? They're all about in the suburbs. I said to him, I said, well, do you participate? And he's a Rav of young Israel, Southfield. I said, do you participate like in a board of rabbis? He said, no, not really. On the other hand, Detroit has a very, very large Orthodox Jewish community. So I guess they don't feel the need, you know. Now, again, it could be maybe some other Orthodox rabbis, in there in well, Southfield, Oak Park, but there are also lots now living out in Bloomfield, Hills, something called West Bloomfield, and they probably, because they are surrounded more by majority, conservative reform, they probably do participate. He just says he does feel his congregation, it just doesn't feel the need that he has to. Not to say that he wouldn't participate if there's a communal thing, like a rally for Israel or anything of that nature. He has his own Holocaust programs. I mean, even for as far as Israel is concerned, for Yom Ha'atzmaut, separate programming. They're not participating with the larger, let's say, as a gathering, let's say at the JCC. He doesn't really do that so much. But again, his congregants are all Orthodox, modern. They're modern. So, so he doesn't feel the need. I told you my father, I did feel participated on a certain level with them. He had no choice. I mean, they were the dominant, numbers of Jews, in my town. But exact right. In fact, one time my father was a very good fundraiser. So at one point, the Federation wanted him to chair their campaign for their annual, UJA Federation, but he uses his techniques more to raise money for the day school. That was his baby. I mean, he's a Rav of the shul, the Orthodox shul, but he's devoted, I would say, half of his energies to day school. He wasn't the principal. He hired different people to be the principal. He was called the headmaster. So did I ever tell you this funny story? So my father used to go around to different people and ask for contributions. And he used to keep like a little tiny little notepad and he wrote down people's names, et cetera, et cetera. So he goes into one person's place of business. That's where he approached them, and the man had somebody else in the room with him. I guess he's discussing business matters. My father walks in. The guy goes, "Oh!" So the other guy looks at him. What the guy said, "Oh, it's my rabbi." But they did. They did give him money. And he said when he would approach, let's say, a conservative, probably not so much but he would approach, let's say, a conservative, a Jew, a person of means, he would start off slowly. He would say, "What could you give $100 next year?" Yeah, right. He would keep on upping the amount, And as he gained their trust and respect, they did give him more. So I guess let's finish up with Rabbi Hirsch. Okay. Rabbi Hirsch, right? I think we finished that. We finished that paragraph. All right, let's do the next paragraph. Okay. Hirsch saw Western culture is nothing more than a handmaiden of Torah law. I guess we're somewhat changed now. I mean, I think we are giving a lot of credence, a lot of stress on secular education, how important it is, not just some like really right-wing circles, they only view it as a means of livelihood. I mean, I think we see it as actually having value because it can contribute to one's Torah understanding. He saw it as a means to an end, the end being a fully Torah observant life and value system. Hirsch preached the doctrine of Jewish self-worth. I think that was the problem with a lot of these Reformed Jews. They were like embarrassed by these old-fashioned Jews. I remember at one point in Harrisburg, I'm sure I can't remember. Well, we had there was a separate shul that was founded, a little Orthodox shul. We used to call it the chicken shul because all the shochtim from Empire Chicken, which is Empire was not that far from Harrisburg. You just live in Harrisburg, larger school and space school there. So we just called it the chicken shop. So they once hired as a rug some very, very from guy, but it wore was he British? I don't know, whatever the case. I remember a neighbor of mine, you know, I think she was conservative. I could see she was very uncomfortable seeing him walking down the street. I remember she making comments to me, well, why does he have to dress like that? Because he's so obviously different, and Jewish. And again, he stated that Torah had nothing to be ashamed of in its relationship to human civilization. On the contrary, the alone represented the ultimate goal of that civilizing process. Okay, so we have now concluded. Now you see the difference between Rabbi Bamberg and again, why I think Rabbi Wein was so intrigued by him. He devotes so much, several pages in his book to just because he himself probably confronted this dilemma: how far should the Orthodox community relate, to the non-Orthodox? But it's Rabbi, I don't know what Reform think if they study Rabbi Hirsch. I'm not saying it's commentaries, but that he was like really opposed to them, he and would have like nothing to do with them. So, different. But again, it depends on the time period in history you're living in or the community you're living in. And then you have to deal with the realities, of that time. Yeah. Yes, I remember that. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. 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 Yes. Uh, no. Right. Right. Yeah. You have to just deal with general Jewish things worldwide, or nationally, concerns. But it can be very tricky. I think I really feel I am about those conservative Jews. First of all, they're basically fading away. I mean, they're not. They don't. They were the largest Jewish movement, here in America, and they're not anymore. Jews have either gone. Well, they totally. That's exactly. So the reform movement has actually gained many more adherents, but they're also a mixture of non-Jews and Jews now because of that patrilineal, descent. But Orthodoxy, right? Oh yes. Oh yes. Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. And conservative Judaism just can't seem to deal with these two extremes. So I mean, I don't know, but apparently mostly older population, who go there to pray. Near my son's school in Detroit, there's this gigantic, I mean, it's huge conservative temple, and it's except that there's I mean, place empty, empty, and it's huge. I can't begin to tell you how large. I just throw this on. Uh, right. Well, he's trying to attract members, right? Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, I noticed both in Rochester, where I had lived for all those years, and even in oh yeah, where Rabbi right Yasker is giving some, but yeah, yeah. Look at JTS. Wow. Yeah. Right. Thank you. Yes. Yes. My son was, remember there was a terrible library there? Not my son, my husband